Hey everybody, Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Today is Sunday, May the 20th. Welcome to another edition of one of our kind of best of type shows. Today the topic is going to be some of my favorite debut albums. So over the course of rock history, we've had a lot of first albums by bands that just kind of burst out of nowhere and wound up really making an impact and kind of jumpstarting their careers with a fantastic debut album. So what I've done, I originally was going to do a top 20 or top 25, and then I just kept finding all sorts of great stuff. And I figured, you know what, I'm just going to grab a bunch from some of the different decades. So we got some from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And then I've got like my top, I think it's like 15, my top favorite 15 debut albums of all time. So let's, and you know, we may, some of these may, as I'm going through them, I may say, oh, that should be in my top 15. So I think I got my top 15 pretty set, but we'll see how it goes, all right? So anyway, I'm going to start off from the 1960s. So the 60s, big era for psychedelia and British pop and American roots rock and all sorts of other things, kind of the beginnings of hard rock and proto metal. A lot of bands coming out of the woodwork in the 60s and some really great debuts. Now, funny enough, some of the bands that you might think should appear here actually didn't start off with great debut albums. So, you know, The Who and The Stones and like the Beatles, Jefferson Airplane really had okay debuts, but nothing like groundbreaking that really like set the world on fire. But some of the bands I'm going to talk about here actually did have some debut albums. And if there's a couple you're not hearing in some of these decades, just wait till the end, because I think my top 15 or so is going to be comprised of some really obvious choices. So first one I'm going to talk about here is the debut album from the Allman Brothers band. Okay, self-titled. There we go. Let's deal with the glare. There we go. Kind of a neat album. Most people talk about the best Allman Brothers release from that early era as being the Live at the Fillmore, and deservedly so. It's a fantastic live album. But I really think that the debut's got a lot of power to it. Some really great songs, of course, most of which would be staples in the band's live history going forward throughout their career, and certainly took on new life at the on the Fillmore East album. But, you know, with I Don't Want You No More, It's Not My Cross to Bear, Black-Hearted Woman, Trouble No More, Every Hungry Woman, Dreams, and of course Whipping Post. Classics. It's a classic album. Kind of bluesy, jazzy, rock, hard rock, the birth of Southern rock, basically. Just a really good album. And it may be the birth also of the twin guitar sound, which very shortly after made famous by British band Wishbone Ash, and then of course Thin Lizzy and Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, so on and so forth. But I think the birth of that whole thing with Dickie Betts and Duane Allman kind of started here. So another classic, legendary debut album from the 60s. Of course, the debut from The Doors. Jim Morrison and company. Doesn't get much better than this, top to bottom. Just tons of classic tunes. Break On Through, Soul Kitchen, The Crystal Ship. What else? Alabama Song, Light My Fire, huge hit. Backdoor Man, End of the Night, and of course, The End. Just a classic debut that basically put the Doors on the map and just put them through the stratosphere and made a living legend out of Jim Morrison in the process. Okay, here's one that's probably first supergroup ever in existence. Another album that just kind of took rock and roll to extremes, brought in lots of power with Marshall amps and Gibson and Fender guitars and feedback and wah-wah and fuzz. Talking about Fresh Cream by Cream. The original power trio. Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker. Okay. And of course Jack Bruce on vocals and bass. A killer album. They probably released their next album, Disraeli Gears, probably stronger, but this was still a very powerful debut. I Feel Free, NSU, Sleepy Time Time, Sweet Wine, Spoonful, Cat Squirrel, Rollin' and Tumblin', I'm So Glad, and of course Toad, the drum solo excuse for Mr. Baker. Really good album. Great debut. Here's one of my favorites from the 60s, one that often doesn't get talked about enough, but I think it's just absolutely fantastic. And again, it didn't contain some of the more well-known tracks that this band would later on write, but I just think it's such a powerful statement of British blues rock and hard rock. I'm talking about Tons of Sobs by Free, Paul Kossoff, Paul Rogers and Company, Simon Kirke, Andy Fraser. Great stuff here. Oh, what do we have here? Walk in My Shadow, Going Down Stone, Moonshine, Sweet Tooth, Over the Green Hills, Part 1 and 2, Worry, I'm a Mover. Blistering blues rock. I mean, Kossoff's guitar work is so spectacular on here, and of course, Paul Rogers' vocals, you can't beat it. What a great debut. A great band. Here's another one. Who's coming back over to America. Okay, On Time by Grand Funk Railroad. A band that had a string of hits and best-selling albums. Basically, the critics hated them, the fans loved them. They toured, they packed arenas and theaters all over the place. Their albums sold ridiculously well. They were just a jamming garage band. Again, pretty heavy for the time, pretty raucous, pretty raw. What do we got in here? Are You Ready? Anybody's Answer, Time Machine, High on a Horse, TNUC, Into the Sun, Heartbreaker. Can't Be Too Long, Ups and Downs, just and a really long album too. I mean, this was really long for the time and pretty close to, as far as the length of music, close to being a double album. Just a really, really great album, great vocals, just grooves are endless, killer guitar work. Dig this album a lot, dig the band a lot too. Okay, kind of along those same lines. The James Gang, Your Album, Joe Walsh and Company. Loved how these guys mixed like heavy rock and blues and little bits of folk and sometimes even like some kind of rock and country. Okay, and tons of really great songs on here that would kind of, set the stage for the James Gang over the next couple of albums and basically put Joe Walsh on the map, not only as a pretty cool singer, he had a really different voice, but as a really, really kick-ass guitar player. And of course, he would later go on to even greater fame as a solo artist and of course as a member of the Eagles. But Your Album is kind of where it all started. All right, so this one, technically it's their debut, though the singer/guitar player actually had a solo album that came out before this, titled The Name of the Band. He would actually later take the title of that album, turn it into a band. Of course, I'm talking about Leslie Weston Mountain. This is Climbing. So although I personally classify Leslie West's Mountain album as a mountain album, technically, if we're going to get technical here, this is the debut from Mountain. This came out right around the time where they were set to play at Woodstock, of course, and kicking off with Mississippi Queen, and you got theme from Imaginary Western, Never in My Life, For Yasgur's Farm, Sitting on a Rainbow, Boys in the Band, killer, heavy, heavy rock. Another one of those bands who probably don't get enough credit for helping spearhead the proto-metal movement, which would later become known as heavy metal in the later 70s. Probably one of the heaviest bands of the era, right here. So, what else we got here? Okay, Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. Got to talk about this one, right? This is just a really, really great kind of pop album, but with a lot of elements that later became known as progressive rock. And, you just can't discard the importance that this band took part in kind of adding symphonic elements to standard rock and pop music. Basically the use of the mellotron and orchestra to kind of give that symphonic element, something that progressive rock bands, Yes and Genesis and King Crimson shortly thereafter just took hold of and ran with. But it all kind of started with the Moody Blues. A little bit of the Beatles too. They kind of were about the same time. But a great song we got here. The Day Begins, Dawn, The Morning, Lunch Break, The Afternoon, Evening, Nights in White Satin. Okay, it's a really great, lush, dreamy album. Very, very important stuff. Great debut. Okay, this one burst on the scene and just people were like, what the hell is this? Vincebus Eruptum from Blue Cheer, straight out of San Francisco. Guys cranking their amps to 12 with fuzz and distortion and feedback and just volume. Of course, their rendition of Summertime Blues kind of took the world by storm. What else? But there's other good stuff on here. Rock Me Baby, Doctor Please, Out of Focus, Parchment Farm, Second Time Around, and All Night Long. Just some great, great stuff. And probably the best album they ever released. They've got a slew of albums that came after it. Many of them are very cool, very solid. This is the best. This is also the heaviest one. The second album was also pretty damn good. They kind of moved away from that really loud, heavy rock sound on future releases and dabbled in like little bits of southern rock and country rock and straight up rock and roll, kind of like Steppenwolf type of thing. But this was a game changer. This one right here. Speaking of game changers, okay. This album also, I think, had a lot to do with the early heavy rock sound. And I think the guitar player who leads this band, it's actually kind of a solo album, but I always called it a Jeff Beck group album. This is called Truth. Okay. So, we got him. We got a very, very young Rod Stewart. You got Ronnie Wood and all sorts of other people on here. Who else is on here? Ron Wood, Mick Waller on drums. John Paul Jones guests on Hammond organ. Keith Moon even shows up on here. There's a lot of history, legends behind the making of this album. But in truth, what this really was a killer heavy blues rock album that kind of set the stage for what be the kind of the style that Led Zeppelin would go and perfect for years to come. So just really, really great tunes on here. I got Shapes of Things, Let Me Love You, Morning Dew, You Shook Me, Green Sleeves, Rock My Plimsoll, Beck's Bolero, Blues Deluxe, Ain't Superstitious, killer guitar work. Rod Stewart is off the charts on here. Just a really, really great debut of a band that if they could have stayed together and if they would have played Woodstock like they were supposed to, probably would have been absolutely enormous and maybe stayed together longer than the two albums that they did. So, okay. And just keep in mind, I know I'm probably missing some stuff here and there. I'm already looking and thinking, and I forgot to pull that out. So, forgive me if there's some that you're not seeing here. I just Sir Lord Baltimore's debut, forgot to include here. Cactus's debut. So stuff that I just forgot to pull. But, we could do an hour-long show on something like this. So anyway, let's move on to the 70s. Wishbone Ash, self-titled debut. Fantastic. Twin guitar harmonies all over the place. Great mix of hard rock and blues, little bits of jazz, tiny touch of prog. What do we got here? Blind Eye, Lady Whiskey, Error of My Ways, Queen of Torture, Handy, Phoenix. Just epic, majestic guitar work on these early Wishbone Ash albums, and I just absolutely love this debut to death. Fantastic. Okay, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Got to have this on here, right? Fresh off of his many years in Deep Purple, he decided to go off on his own, start a new band. This is notable for the first ever real kind of mainstream appearance on an album by Ronnie James Dio. Of course, before this, he was in a band called Elf, but it was this album that kind of put him on the map. A really, really great album that would only kind of hint at what was to come on the Rainbow Rising album, but still, you've got Man on a Silver Mountain on here, Black Sheep of the Family, Catch the Rainbow, great tune, Snake Charmer, Temple of the King, If You Don't Like Rock and Roll, Still I'm Sad, 16th Century Greensleeves, and Self-Portrait. Very, very strong album. Again, probably not as strong as the two that came after it, but this is where Ritchie put Ronnie on the map. So for that, it's totally notable and a great, great debut. All right, here's one I had to include here because I've always really loved this album. I know when it comes to this band, most people kind of forget about the debut and they really start on their second album, Fly By Night, and going forward, and I kind of get that. But I have always had a soft spot for the debut from Rush. It is what it is. It's a very different album from everything that came after it. They just kind of basically took that like early Led Zeppelin Mountain type of framework, that really heavy guitar-led blues rock, and just kind of took it into the stratosphere. But there's something about some of the tunes on here. This is a heavy rocking album, and I just remember being a kid and loving this to death. I mean, when you've got Finding My Way, Take a Friend, What You're Doing, Working Man, Before and After, In the Mood. It's just great, great songs. Alex Lifeson just ripping on here on guitar. Got Geddy Lee on vocals, and of course Mr. John Rutsey on drums, who would leave shortly thereafter to be replaced by Neil Peart. But I dig this album a lot. I think it's a fantastic debut. All right, more self-titled stuff. This is debut from Starr Castle, American progressive rock band who kind of really took the style of Yes down different avenues, but really, really dig this a lot. This is a band that made a real good name for themselves, sold a bunch of albums in the mid-late 70s. This one's got Lady of the Lake, Elliptical Seasons, Forces, Stargate, Sunfield, To the Firewind, and Nova. Just really good symphonic rock, again, with those kind of high-pitched John Anderson-ish lead vocals, tons of keyboards, really melodic guitar solos, lengthy tunes, a really, really beautiful progressive rock album from the 70s. All right, going to fast forward a little later in the decade, a band that kind of jumped out and became, for a bunch of years anyway, like kind of hit machines. Studio musicians par excellence who came together and really could write good tunes, and they could play up a storm too. I'm talking about Toto, self-titled. All right. Hold the Line, of course, was a huge hit for the band. A lot of the good tunes on here. Child's Anthem, I'll Supply the Love, Georgie Porgy. Really, really strong album, and a band that would just continue to get bigger and bigger over the course of the next 4, 5, 6 years. And they sold a lot of albums, and still popular to this day. Dig that a lot. Very good debut. Okay, so this guy, this guitar player, his first album did very, very well for himself. So he left Procol Harum to go solo. Of course, I'm talking about Robin Trower. And while he would have a huge hit one album later on, his sophomore album with Bridge of Sighs, it was twice removed from Yesterday. So 2 on 1 there. That's the album right there. That would kind of really propel him into the eyes of not just guitar players, but rock and roll fans as well. And his style, which of course is somewhat psychedelic, mixed psychedelia, blues, and heavy rock, kind of a lot of influence of Jimi Hendrix there. And this album had a lot of really great tunes like Daydream and Hannah, Man of the World, I Can't Stand It, I Can't Wait Much Longer, Rock Me Baby, all sorts of really good, and of course the title track. Again, setting the stage for his sophomore album, which would really, really break him big all over the world. But a great debut. Okay, pronounce Lynyrd Skynyrd. Got to have this one on here, right? Of course. If the Allman Brothers were kind of the birth of Southern rock, to an extent, the genre as we really knew it, that most of us know it today, really, really took off thanks to this album and this band right here. So, you know, you've got 38 Special and Molly Hatchet and Marshall Tucker Band and, you know, all these other bands, but it was the Outlaws. But this band and this album is what really set the stage for all of that. You know, twin guitars, the totally unique vocals of Ronnie Van Zant. I Ain't the One, Tuesday's Gone, Give Me 3 Steps, Simple Man, Things Going On, Missing Kid, Poison Whiskey, and of course Freebird. Almost basically up, down, top to bottom, classics from start to finish. Just a great album, a legendary album, and of course, a killer debut. Okay, Swan Song Records. Of course, you know that was the label started up by Led Zeppelin and their management company, and they obviously wanted other bands and artists to be on that label. And one of the first, if not the first, that they signed was a little band called Bad Company, their self-titled debut. So, of course, you got Paul Rodgers and Simon Kirke, fresh off their stint in Free, which kind of fell apart, put together this particular album with Mick Ralphs on guitar from Mott the Hoople and Boz Burrell on bass, fresh from King Crimson. A classic album, classic debut that sold a ton of copies. Can't Get Enough, Rock Steady, Ready for Love, Don't Let Me Down, Bad Company, The Way I Choose, Moving On, and Seagull. Classic stuff. You know, while I'm at another one that I forgot here is the debut from Detective, also on Swan Song Records. Another very, very notable debut album from the 70s. Okay, here's another example of a band who had obviously better releases that came after, but this debut is actually very, very strong. Worth mentioning here, of course, I'm talking about Aerosmith. American band from Boston, the Boston area. This deserves to be on here for a couple tunes, right? So, of course, Dream On and Mama Kin, Walking the Dog. Right there, you got 3 classic Aerosmith tunes. Got to include this here. Top debuts. Okay, from Australia. You know who I'm talking about. AC/DC, High Voltage. Classic debut. It's a Long Way to the Top. The Jack, Livewire, TNT. Can I Sit Next to You, Girl? She's Got Balls, High Voltage. Did this band ever release a bad album? Really don't think so. even like during the 90s and 2000s when a lot of people said they just kind of kept making the similar formula, kind of the same albums over and over again. None of them were ever bad. And even though all the ones of the Bon Scott area too were just not a bad album to be released by that band. Okay, Queen's debut. Okay. Classic stuff right here. Keep Yourself Alive, Doing All Right, Great King Rat, My Fairy King, A Liar. Love that tune. The Night Comes Down, Modern Times Rock and Roll, Son and Daughter. Awesome, heavy Queen tune. Jesus, Seven Seas of Rye, Mad the Swine. Come on. It's just a fantastic debut of a great band that, of course, also went on to do even better things, but the debut still really, really strong. All right, more self-titled stuff. Boy, we got a lot of these today. A totally underrated band. Totally underrated band. One of the most important bands on the early 70s and most of the 70s heavy rock scene that just never really got their due. They were as heavy as Sabbath and Zeppelin and Purple, and I just never understood why these guys were not like massive worldwide. I'm talking about Budgie, the Welsh band, one of the greatest trios ever. Okay, what do we got on here? Guts, Everything in My Heart, The Author. New Disintegration, Parachutist Woman. What a killer tune that is. Rape of the Locks, You and I, Homicidal Suicide. Great stuff. I tell you, if you never checked out Budgie, you should. You need to. Some of the heaviest riffs of that era, I'm telling you. Great, great band. Great album. Another self-titled debut from a band that's, okay, they're the album after this, the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. Probably leagues better than this debut. But because this debut is still very strong and it kind of signaled the arrival of a band unlike anything we've ever seen before, I've got to talk about them on this show. Of course, Gentle Giant, just a killer band that were so unique, and they're so missed today. But Giant, Funny Ways, Alucard, Isn't It Quiet and Cold, Nothing at All, Why Not, and The Queen. Eclectic, complex, folky, proggy, tiny bit of blues, just little bits of chamber, all sorts of weird stuff going on. Just a band that did all sorts of things, little bits of madrigal and Renaissance type stuff. Just a killer band that, like I said, only got better from here. But this is a very, very notable debut. Okay. Dreamboat Annie by Heart. Gotta have this here, right? Fantastic debut. A lot of great songs on here. The Wilson Sisters, Crazy on You, and Magic Man, all that kind of stuff. Just a wonderful, wonderful album. Ann Wilson, still to this day, is one of the best female vocalists alive. And here, she just tore it out of the park. Nancy Wilson on acoustic and rhythm guitars. Fantastic album. Bits of hard rock and pop and folk. Just a really, really strong debut. Okay. Another band that went on to greater heights after their debut was released, but now listening back on this debut, it's just amazing how good it is and how well it holds up. I'm talking about the self-titled debut from Kansas. Perhaps the first, all sorts of glare there, perhaps the first notable American progressive rock band. By the way, I'm missing Happy the Man's debut here too. So, because I know someone's going to point it out, Happy the Man, self-titled, also should be on this list here. But back to Kansas. Can I Tell You, Bringing It Back, Lonely Wind, Alexis, Journey from Marybrown. Okay, any album that's got Journey from Marybrown on it, that's saying something right there. The Pilgrimage, Apricot, and Death of Mother Nature Suite. That last two-part tune right there is just incredible. Just great American progressive rock. Love it, love it, love it. Ted Nugent, more self-titled debuts here. A colossal album, fresh from his stint with the, Amboy Dukes. Just drawing a blank. Stranglehold, Stormtrooper, Just What the Doctor Ordered, Snakeskin Cowboys, Motor City Madhouse, sorry. What else? Queen of the Forest, great tune, overlooked tune. Amazing. Strong, hard rock, blues, great guitar work. This started it all for the Nugent. I mean, I know he had some success with the Amboy Dukes, but it wasn't until this album that he really became a superstar. Okay, well, the beginning of the decade, Growers of Mushroom by Leafhound. Had to mention this one. It's kind of an unknown album to a lot of people, but this probably one of the first stoner rock albums, a heavy rock classic that so many people don't know about. I urge you to check this out if you haven't. Blistering blues rock guitar solos, great vocals, really good tunes, pretty damn heavy. Think of like a little heavier Humble Pie. That's what you got here. Very, very cool. And of course, you got to talk about this one, right? Van Halen's debut. Game changer for so many people, for so much. Just brought a totally new style of guitar playing onto the scene thanks to Mr. Edward Van Halen. And it's heavy. It's blisteringly modern for the time. This is the late 70s. This just took things to another level. Like I said, a game changer album that got a ton of classics on it. You know, Running with the Devil, of course, Eruption, You Really Got Me, Ain't Talking About Love, I'm the One, Jamie's Crying, Atomic Punk, Feel Your Love Tonight, Little Dreamer, Ice Cream Man, and On Fire. Legendary. Last one from the 70s. Okay, Todd Rundgren's Utopia. What a dynamite debut. This was basically Todd Rundgren, previously mainly a pop guy, and pop and light rock guy who wanted to do a progressive rock album. Let's put together a new band and just go out there and do half-hour-long songs with lengthy Moog synthesizer solos and lots of guitar solos, and that's what he did. It's fantastic. Utopia theme, Freak Parade, Freedom Fighters, The Icon. Oof. Killer, killer, killer. All right, so that leads us to the 80s, doesn't it? All right, so got a bunch of really cool ones here. Sabotage, Sirens. Man, this is a heavy album. I remember the first time I heard this, I was like, whoa. I love this, and I love this band. Great, great album. Michael Schenker's Maiden solo jaunt after he left UFO and the Scorpions. Classic album. Armed and Ready, Cry for the Nations, Victim of Illusion, Feels Like a Good Thing, Into the Arena, Looking Out from Nowhere, Lost Horizons. Ugh. Guitar hero mania there from Mr. Schenker. All right, I got some here that are later in the decade, but let me jump into Morbid Tales by Celtic Frost. Another one of those kind of game changer albums that kind of signaled the arrival of what we later got to know as extreme metal. And you listen to it now, it's just so raw and primal and like unlike anything that came out at the time. A fantastic, very, very important debut. What else we got? New wave of British heavy metal, Angel Witch. Gotta have this on here, right? Probably one of the shining stars, one of the better albums of the NWOBHM. New wave of British heavy metal. A really, really good album. It's too bad that the band just never really broke really, really big at the time. Okay. I actually think this should have been in the 70s, right? I think so. This is late 70s. Sorry, this should be in the other one. But the debut from Angel. Got to have this here, right? Put it in the wrong pile, folks. Tower, Rock and Rollers, Broken Dreams, Mariner, Sunday Morning, A Long Time, On and On. Killer album, great hooks, great guitar work, wonderful keyboards from Mr. Giuffria. A very, very underrated album. How about this one? Busts out of the gate with the 80s. Debut from Iron Maiden. Again, the Killers album is better, but this is just still a kick-ass debut. Prowler, Remember Tomorrow, Running Free, Phantom of the Opera, Transylvania, Strange World, Sanctuary, Charlotte the Harlot, and of course Iron Maiden. This is every song on here is just fantastic. Just a great young band who just are out there going for the juggler and wanting to take over the world. And they would get even better on their next album. Okay, back to new wave of British heavy metal. Lighting to the Nation. I know it's white, you can't see it. Diamond Head. Great stuff on here. Again, another band that just knocked it out of the park on their debut and then just couldn't really keep it going more than a couple of years. Very influential to a lot of the bands. You know, Metallica just praised them to death. But just some great, great tunes on here. And he just really, it's heavy. It's kind of atmospheric. Great vocals. Just great instrumentation. Just really, really, really good stuff. What else? What else? Here's another one that should have been in the 70s. Lot. The debut from Molly Hatchet. Self-titled debut. Can you see it? There we go. This is important because this band kind of rose up from the ashes of the demise of Lynyrd Skynyrd after the plane crash. And I think that this band doesn't get enough due for really kind of taking that Skynyrd sound with a little bit heavier, though, and really pumping some life back into Southern rock, because, quite frankly, the world was just devastated after the plane crash and the kind of the loss of Skynyrd. So, of course, they would reunite years later, but I think it's bands like Molly Hatchet and another great debut, which I forgot, Rosington Collins Band, which formed out of the ashes of the demise of Skynyrd. But this debut from Molly Hatchet, really, really, really strong. Very noteworthy. Okay, also in the 80s. Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz. Okay, fresh from being jettisoned from Sabbath, he puts together a killer band with Randy Rhoads, Bob Daisley, Lee Kerslake. Really, really good stuff. Some classic Ozzy tunes on here. Basically, he's refused to be left for dead and just started selling better than Sabbath did, although Sabbath's Heaven and Hell album and that were kind of like neck and neck in terms of popularity, but that really made Ozzy a superstar on his own. Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble, Texas Flood, killer debut. The top to bottom great songs. What a player, right? Just an amazing musician that brought blues back on the map in a big way. Okay, over to England, the second wave of progressive rock. I'm talking about Marillion's Script for a Jester's Tear. Got to have this one here. What a fantastic debut that is. Again, they would go to greater heights with Misplaced Childhood and Clutching at Straws, but I think this is a really, really strong debut. Got some great tunes on it. Title track, He Knows You Know, The Web, Garden Party, Chelsea Monday, Forgotten Sons. Yeah, that's good. That's classic. Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force. I mean, this also was a game changer in a lot of ways, because when this was released, Eddie Van Halen and that style of guitar playing was still riding high, obviously. And then this guy comes out, and first he shows up in Steeler to little acclaim, but then he's in Alcatraz, and that started to get him really noticed. And then all of a sudden he leaves Alcatraz, he goes out on his own and puts out this ridiculous statement of guitar playing, and all of a sudden the whole neoclassical shred guitar style is all the rage. And again, a game changer and a great album that has, I think there are better songs on the album that came after it, Marching Out. It was mostly a vocal album. Here, 75% of this album is all instrumental, just ridiculous guitar compositions, and just, again, like I said, a game changer. All right, Ronnie James Dio, Holy Diver. This arguably could be in my top 10 or 15. It's, again, my opinion could change on a daily basis, but this is a great one. Very influential to myself, and I know millions of other people. This was Ronnie after he left. Ronnie and Vinnie, after they left Black Sabbath, formed their own band. Vivian Campbell, hotshot Irish guitar star on lead guitar. Great songs top to bottom. Just an amazing debut album from a band that really were huge in the 80s. And a singer that is so close to all of us and who left us way too soon. God, what is that, 8-10 years ago? It's gone, time's flying by, and we miss him every day. But this is just an amazing debut from a great band and a fantastic singer and a great guitar player. Okay, late in the decade, we got two ridiculously great albums that helped usher in what we know as death metal, in a lot of cases, technical death metal. Scream Bloody Gore by Death. Again, the impact of the Florida extreme metal scene cannot be overlooked here. And then, of course, we got Altars of Madness by Morbid Angel. Two just fantastically heavy, just unlike anything we've ever heard. This just basically ushered the whole death metal scene in right here, folks. You can talk a little bit how Celtic Frost and Slayer kind of also helped there, but I think these two, Possessed too, but I think these two albums by these two bands really, really just woke everybody's eyes up and ushered in new amounts of brutality and technicality into heavy metal. The world was never the same after that. Okay, where are we going now? So that was... so we got some stuff here. So the 90s, okay, mostly 90s stuff. I don't think I have any 2000s in here. So a band from California who decided they wanted to kind of mimic the classic progressive rock bands of the 70s. I'm talking about The Light by Spock's Beard. fantastic debut. I remember the first time I heard this album, I was like, holy cow, that is just great and adventurous and totally replicating a sound and a style that I love. And this just got these guys going, and they're still pumping out great music to this day. One of the most important bands on the progressive rock scene of the 90s, which actually is the third wave of prog, right? And these guys were definitely the forefront, as well as with the Flower Kings. Back to extreme metal. So early 90s, there is a movement starting in Sweden and Norway called the black metal scene. So then this album basically just kickstarted the whole black metal scene out of Norway. De Mysterious, Dom Satanas, Mayhem. Just an evil, evil sounding record. And it's creepy as all hell. You listen to this today and it still can send shivers of dread up and down your spine. It's just so different, so chilling, so black metal. There's other ones. What else we got here? How about this one? The Nightside Eclipsed by Emperor. Another very, very important album of the early black metal scene. These Norwegians knew what they were doing. And this is just fantastic because this brought in like all sorts of cool, almost like prog rock keyboards and with all the blast beats and the hellishly chilling black metal screaming vocals. Just really, really adventurous music. There's the guys right there. A very, very important album in the history of black metal and a great, great debut. What else we got? How about Suffocation's debut, right? Effigy of the Forgotten. This was, 1991. This is a twofer here, but another killer. And these guys kind of formed, they're from New York, they kind of formed in the wake of Death and Morbid Angel. Took that really, really heavy, brutal, technical death metal style to the next level. A lot of other bands kind of popped up right in the early 90s, not necessarily from the Florida scene as well, but not also from the East Coast. Suffocation, very, very important one. All right. Government Mule, self-titled. Mid-90s. Basically, Warren Haynes, Alan Woody were members of the Allman Brothers band, but they kind of wanted to form this little offshoot band where they can go play like heavier, jammier music. Just think about that. Heavier, jammier music than the Allman Brothers. And kind of replicate that like early 70s kind of heavy blues rock sound, like Free and Grand Funk Railroad and the Cactus and that sort of thing. They totally hit it out of the park on this debut. Man, this is great. Long tunes, lots of great guitar solos and riffs, really cool vocals. Oh, Mother Earth, Rockin' Horse. What else we got in here? Train, Mule, Dolphineus, Painted Silverlight, cover of Mr. Big. A great debut from a band that I just saw them recently. They're still out there killing it. All right, my last one from the 90s, this is from the 90s, is the debut from Transatlantic, Stolt, Morse, Portnoy, Trewavis. Okay? This is what you call a supergroup, folks. And they knocked it out of the park. I hate to keep using that term, but this debut was so popular with the prog rock audiences, I should say, that they continued to kind of stick together and reappear every few years with a new album. They done some tours and live appearances. I actually saw them at Nearfest on this one after they released this album. It was great. Perfecting the half-hour-long songs, 15-minute-long songs, lots of extended musical passages. This is just a throwback to the classic prog of the 70s. And if you're into, of course, members from Dream Theater and the Flower Kings and Marillion and Spock's Beard, all into one, making great music. Big killer debut. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of my absolute favorites. I love all these, obviously, but let's talk about some that I think are kind of little head and shoulders above the rest. Show No Mercy by Slayer. Still to this day, my favorite Slayer album. There's just something about this that's just so powerful, so potent. Again, the early stages of death metal. It's a thrash album, essentially, because Slayer were always a thrash band. But there's just something about the music of Slayer that I think really influenced the whole death metal scene. And I just think this is a fantastic album. There's just some great, great tunes on here, great riffs on here. It's just an evil, powerful album. Love it to death. Also, honorable mentions to the debuts from Exodus, Bonded by Blood, as well as Testament, should be on here as well. Anthrax, great ones. Overkill, can't do them all. All right, 1960s, of course, you had this album, which another game changer, took the world by storm, and rock guitar playing was never the same again. Are You Experienced by the Jimi Hendrix Experience? What can I say? I think the Jimmy's next two studio albums were actually better than this, but this is just such a mega release with so many classics on here. Purple Haze, Manic Depression, Hey Joe, Lover Confusion, Wind Cries Mary, Fire, Third Stone from the Sun, Foxy Lady, Are You Experienced, Stone Free. I mean, come on. And there's more. But it's just so good, so ahead of its time when it came out, and still one of the greatest debut albums of all time. All right, Kill 'Em All by Metallica. Again, their next two albums are much better than this, I think, but do you remember where you were when this album was released in the early 80s? I mean, thrash wasn't really a thing at the time. You had, Venom and Celtic Frost and Slayer, what have you, Anvil, who were kind of doing that kind of speed metal, early extreme metal type of thing. And then these guys come around and take it to a totally new level. Blistering riffs and double bass drums and killer guitar solos and just manic, crazy debut. Hit the Lights, The Four Horsemen, Motor Breath, Jump in the Fire, Whiplash, Phantom Lord, No Remorse, Metal Militia, Seek and Destroy. It's classic debut. Again, Ride the Lightning would kind of take that framework to a new level, but that's where it all started. That's a killer debut. Speaking of killer debuts, Melissa by Merciful Fate. How great is this album? Another one of those bands that just were so ahead of their time, and they just sounded like nobody else. There was nobody that sounded like Merciful Fate. The crazy King Diamond vocals, the dual guitars, great riffs. It was just evil, dark-sounding stuff. What do we got on here? Speaking of evil, the song Evil, great. Curse of the Pharaohs, Into the Coven, Black Funeral, Satan's Fall, and title track. Another one of those just eye-popping, just remarkable debuts. All right, back into the 70s. Very heavy, very humble by my beloved Uriah Heep. Another one of those just fantastic debuts from a band that was so heavy to the history of heavy rock music. What do we got on here? Gypsy, Walking in Your Shadows, Come Away Melinda, Lucy Blues, Dream Air, Real Turned On, I'll Keep on Trying, and of course Wake Up, Set Your Sights, with Bird of Prey as well, which was on the English version, included here on my import remaster. Killer Hammond organ, heavy guitar riffs, great vocals, great album. All right, got to have Led Zeppelin's first, right? Of course you do. This was another just ridiculous million seller that took this young band who formed out of the ashes of the Yardbirds and made them superstars. All sorts of great songs on here, of course. Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, You Shook Me, Dazed and Confused, Your Time Is Gonna Come, Black Mountain Side, Communications Breakdown, I Can't Quit You, Baby. And of course, how many more times? Excuse me. That's what happens when you talk a lot. All right. Sorry about this, folks. Gotta have this one. Debut from Kiss. Classic songs. Trying to recover here. Most of these tunes actually became better live on stage. But when you've got Strutter, Nothing to Lose, Firehouse, Cold Gin, Deuce, 100,000 Years in Black Diamond, come on. That is a classic debut right there. If there ever was one. Man, this is embarrassing. Okay, King Crimson, In the Court of the Crimson King. I think I got my wits back about me here. So, for me anyway, this is the first real, start to finish, progressive rock album. 21st Century Schizoid Man, I Talk to the Wind, Epitaph, Moonchild, and of course, the title track. Mellotrons and blazing lead guitars like we'd never heard before, and great vocals by Greg Lake. Just a wonderful, wonderful album that just started. Again, I know the Beatles and the Moody Blues kind of set the seeds for prog, but this was the first full-on prog album that opened the doors for so many other bands. Ronnie Montrose, Sammy Hagar, the debut from Montrose. One of the best debuts and pure hard rock albums of the 70s. Classic tunes, one after another. Great guitar work, great vocals. Just so memorable, so rocking. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's debut. Another one. One of the, Cream probably is the first supergroup. You know, Blind Faith, Derek and the Dominoes, but the first prog supergroup for sure. Great album. Barbarian, Take a Pebble, Knife Edge, Three Fates, Tank, Lucky Man. That's a great debut. Santana, self-titled. Great band, great album. Put them on the map, got them onto the Woodstock stage, and they never looked back. One of my all-time favorites. This is a top 3 for me. I just think this is a fantastic album by a band that I think all too many people think of as, you know, that hit machine they became. But man, their early albums in the late 60s and early mid-70s were just fantastic. I'm talking about the Chicago Transit Authority, of course, later to be known as Chicago. What do we got on here? Introduction. Does anybody really know what time it is? Beginnings. Questions 67 and 68. Listen. Poem 58. Killer Terry Kath guitar work on this whole album. Freeform guitar. South California Purples. More great guitar work on there. I'm a Man. Prologue. Someday. Liberation. This is just... You got like progressive rock on here, you got jazz on here, you got blues, you got pop, you got regular rock and roll. It's got it all. Great horns, killer guitar work, fantastic vocals, keyboards, the whole 9 yards. A lot of jamming. Okay, these are my top 2, and then we're done. All right. Thankfully, I got over my coughing fit, and I can stop talking shortly. So... I think my number 1's got to be number 1 just because it has to be number 1. You'll know as soon as I get to it, you probably know what it's going to be. My number 2 is one of the probably, I think, the biggest selling debuts of all time. It's an album that still sells today. It's an album where you probably, if you turn on and listen to FM radio or satellite or what have you, you probably hear most of the songs on this album. I've probably heard this album and these songs more than any other album I own, but it's one of the rare albums and rare batch of songs where even though they've been played to death, I can still pop this album on and listen to it start to finish and really enjoy it. Not a lot that can do that. I'm talking about the debut from Boston. This is just like a perfect album. Just one anthem after another. The production is so awesome. The songs are so memorable. The guitar work is just brilliant. The arrangements are fantastic. Just everything about them. The vocals are just off the charts. Just otherworldly. It's just something about this album that it's just so perfect. And it just came about at the right time. And it's proven to be like everlasting and timeless. That's the word I was looking for. Just timeless songs. It's hard rocking. It's some of the harmony, the vocal harmonies are just great. It's just a perfect album that normally would have been my number 1 debut of all time. But unfortunately, I got to pick this one because of my allegiance to the band itself, but more importantly, the history and the influence that this album has had on bands and music and a couple different genres that still remain to this day, that will forever remain. I'm talking about Black Sabbath's debut album, where, you know, there would be probably no heavy metal were it not for this album. There were other bands that kind of popped up around that time that also carried that heaviness. You know, we've mentioned Sir Lord Baltimore, we mentioned Mountain, of course, Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, and Uriah Heep, Budgie perhaps as well. But if it wasn't for Black Sabbath that started with this album, again, they started as a blues band, like a heavy blues band, and there's some blues influence on this album, of course, but they would kind of drop most of that in successive albums. But where would the world be today, the musical world, without this? It's just think of it. What do we got in here? Black Sabbath, The Wizard, Wicked World, Behind the Wall of Sleep, NIB. I mean, come on, just classic tunes, all of them, legendary tunes. And tunes that the band, still were playing till recently, till they decided to pack it in, right? So just another one of those game changer albums. There's been a number of them here, but I think this is definitely one of them. For me, this is the best debut of all time. And I am Pete Pardo. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here very often on the mighty YouTube. Thanks for joining us today on this lengthy favorite debut albums of all time. We got more stuff coming up. I apologize for not being too active lately. I've been doing a bit of traveling for my day job, and now I'm back, so I'm going to get back to some more stuff. So we got that Deep Purple retrospective coming up. We got one on Priest coming up, one on Yes. Oh, I think we got a Michael Schenker one. We've got a new product showcase we're going to be doing very, very soon. I got some rants I'm kind of thinking about. So till then, take care. See you real soon. Bye.